Welcome to Healthy Living. I'm Lori Johnson. Thanks for joining us. Our topic today is medical miracles. And my guest is Dr. Marc Siegel, a New York City physician and the Fox News chief medical analyst. Dr. Siegel, great to see you. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks, Lori. Great to be with you.
So you wrote a new book called The Miracles Among Us, How God's Grace Plays a Role in Healing. Talk about the book. What made you write it and what's it about?
Well, first of all, there were several inspirations to this book, but as I wrote it, like with all books that I've written and others have written, you're going to find this familiar. It evolves as you write it, and the beast comes out different than you expect at the beginning. And it ended up being a much more expanded idea than I was anticipating. I thought I was going to write about medical miracles, but I ended up writing about miracles in general, because it turns out, as you pursue the stories of miracles, that they're more common than you thought, that we've all had one, that they're not medical specifically, but they may be coincidences wrapped in medicine, things that occur that grew. That's what a miracle is. My publisher, who's phenomenal, has said to me repeatedly, identify the main miracle in each chapter. And I'd say to her, well, you know, Lisa, it's hard to say. They're compounding on each other. And that I call it now, and I didn't call this in the book, I call it now a miracle lane. You know you're in the miracle lane. You know that you're in the coincidence lane where that's happening. And so having faith and having positive feeling and courage and resolve and resourcefulness, all of it builds. And you end up, I believe in bringing together the idea of prayer and great medicine, prayer and great technology. And as Cardinal Dolan said to me, you don't receive the miracle you're asking for all the time. Oftentimes, all the time, you receive the miracle that God wants you to have. And I use two biblical stories from that in my book, in a chapter from the Holocaust where a really unfortunate individual is praying on Yom Kippur, and he's strung up by Hungarian soldiers for prayer. And then in the end, he freezes through the night, and they put him in the hospital, which is a miracle in and of itself. And in the hospital, they don't amputate his arm. That's gone. That's necrotic. They literally let it get worse and worse, and then use a towel for anesthesia. This is all reminiscent of the atrocities we are experiencing now with Hamas, which I have another chapter on. And anyway, the point is, here's when the miracles start to occur. It isn't in the medical part, although survival was a miracle. The miracles start to occur because he starts to pray again. And he says one of the most holy prayers we have, the Shema. And at the end of it, when he says the Lord is one, the Allies hit the hospital with bombs, and everybody's killed in this hospital but him. He escapes in Hungarian soldier clothing and goes to Budapest. They take him for a Hungarian soldier, and he's fed first rations, and he makes it through the war. When the Allies come, they almost mistake him for a German soldier because he's speaking fluent German, and they practically kill him. But just in the nick of time, they realize who he is, that he isn't, that he's a Jew, and they save him. And so the question is, why is he saved? And he's saved because later on, he becomes a great rabbi and a great, what's called a mashgiach, looking to kosher food. And it looks like God had a purpose for him. Mm-hmm. That's why God saves Hannah, who's praying for a son that she's never had, and the son that he gives her is Samuel, who ends up being a great prophet. Or Hezekiah, King Hezekiah, it gets boils that are meant to kill him as the Assyrians are invading Jerusalem. And he goes to Isaiah, and Isaiah says, you're going to die of this. But then he prays to God directly. He's afraid to pray to God directly because he feels that he's going to end up having a child that's going to be another bad king like Hezekiah's father was. And instead, God saves him, and he marries Isaiah's daughter and has that exact child that becomes a bad king. And the moral of that story, again, is God gives you the miracles that he that he wants you to have, not the ones that you're necessarily asking for. And I use biblical prophecy, and I use biblical experts throughout the book. I interviewed the head doctor at Lourdes about what constituted the last great miracle from Lourdes with Sister Beatrice. I again interviewed Cardinal Dolan for this book, and he gave me this idea I've already talked to you about, which he calls soft prayers. Not everything is a bolt of lightning from the sky or a blind man seeing again. Sometimes it's a soft miracle where the combination of divine intervention and and um, and great science comes together. 2 days ago, I was down in D.C. and interviewed with Pastor Sam Rodriguez, who's an unbelievable human being. I was talking at the Hispanic Christian Leadership Conference with Sam, and Pastor Sam was the executive producer of Breakthrough. I'll tell one more miracle because I featured that in my book as well. That miracle, again, is a combination of miracles. And Pastor Sam put that in the movies and made a huge movie success out of it. But basically, a 14-year-old kid falls through the ice, John Smith. I interviewed him for this book, and John Smith is perfectly normal now, years later. But look what happened to him. He falls through the ice. They can't find him. They find the other two boys, but not him. The rescuers hear a voice from the shore, "Go 15 feet to the right." They go 15 feet to the right, and there he is. There was no one there. There was no one with that voice. The guy whose voice it was in an office, not out there on the lake, not out there in the lake on that lake in Missouri. He gets to the hospital, and he's had no pulse for 45, 55 minutes. The doctors in the hospital, all of whom I interviewed, said they've never seen a case like this in their entire career. Why did they keep going? Why did they keep going? Because the mother begged them, "Don't give up, don't give up. He's going to come back." She arrives at the hospital, prays to God, directly to God. The moment she starts to pray, his pulse comes back. They save him. And then the other miracle is that, again, he fully wakes up and he doesn't have any neurological damage. So never give up. Keep showing hope. Stay in that miracle lane. We've become a society of palliative care, a society of cookie cutter medicine. And some of the same people that go to church or go to synagogue and pray then come to the hospital, but when they put on their white coats, they become the cookie cutter person, not the same person that was in church. I'm bringing it together for the purpose of healing. We need this right now.
We absolutely need it right now. How would you define a miracle?
A miracle is something which I would call an accumulation of unexpected events that show you the hands of God are there. Now, keep in mind, God's hands are there every moment of every day, but there are times when things come together in a way where there's no other explanation. Why is my father alive at 102? Why is my mother alive at 100? And they're with it. They're alive because of love for each other. But God has decided to smile on them. I believe my mother is a wonderful human being that showed great kindness through her life, and that's why she's lived to 100. My father, a man of great courage. I think that's why he's lived to 102. Why has my patient, Dick, lived to 85 after surviving 4 cancers? Each time he has cancer, he's gifted with the technology of the moment that we didn't have a few years before. He just survived liver cancer with these implanted seeds that weren't there 5 years ago. How come he survives all of these things? Now, his joke is that he's survived so that he can take my phone calls.
All right. This is wonderful. We're going to take a quick break and be right back with Dr. Marc Siegel. The book is called The Miracles Among Us: How God's Grace Plays a Role in Healing. Stay with us. Welcome back to Healthy Living. We are talking with Dr. Marc Siegel, author of the new book, The Miracles Among Us: How God's Grace Plays a Role in Healing. Dr. Siegel, you mentioned briefly in the last segment Hamas, and you talk about miracles. Can you talk about the Israeli hostages who were recently released and the miracle of life there, and also what kind of healing they are facing?
So I want to start by talking about a chapter in my Miracles book on October 7th, 2023. A doctor named Alay Hageg Golan, Dr. Golan, is an anesthesia resident, and she ended up on October 7th on the same ventilator that she's training to save other people's lives because her house was burned to a crisp by Hamas, and she was caught in there with her husband and her 18-month-old daughter. Ariel, and they ended up climbing out the window barely, and they were burns throughout all over their body, and they ended up in the hospital at Sheba. They got airlifted. They barely escaped Hamas, and she was in a coma for 60 days, and she ended up with inhalation burns and with infections and with blood clots, and she was saved by an angel, a woman that had saved so many people of COVID. Actually, this woman had the same name as her daughter, which is Yael, Yael. When she was survived by a series of miracles covered with burns, she ended up going back to work. And Sheba wanted to keep her because they had saved her. But she said, I have to go back to work at the same hospital where I started. And a woman of great courage and her husband of great courage. But here's what she said that's related to the hostages. I said to her, your recovery is the greatest miracle I've seen, and I'm featuring it in my book. She said, I don't want to consider this a miracle because of all the people who didn't survive. I want to honor them by not calling my survival a miracle. And I want to honor her by saying that here. So the hostages who survived, it is a miracle. And they survived tremendous abuse, starvation, deprivation, dehumanization, injuries, broken bones, gunshot wounds, shrapnel, vitamin deficiencies, infections, respiratory infections, and diarrheal diseases, and being chained together and being mocked and tortured and abused, all of which it's a miracle they survived. But we also need to honor those who didn't survive. And as far as their recovery is concerned, they have to be gradually given nutrition. It can't be done overnight. And they have to be gradually brought back to physical health. It's a real art that's going on in Sheba and other hospitals throughout Israel. But the mental recovery takes a lot longer. Dehumanization, depersonalization, nightmares, uh, severe anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder. They're being handled right now with kindness, with compassion. Their families are playing a huge role at nursing them back to health. The sensitivity that it takes to deal with someone in this condition is extremely important. This is a time of healing and a time of gratitude that the deal was made, that they're back. But another way to look at this is it's a reminder of the monstrous evil of Hamas. The Bible has a similar construct, Amalek, we would call them. The horrible monstrosities of Hamas are a reminder to the people of the world to not let them be there, to not let them rule.
You talk about the gradually feeding them after being starved. We hear reports that Hamas force-fed some of these hostages and it caused them GI problems. Can you comment on that at all?
And the GI tract is very sensitive, and that's true. And they ate terrible things, and they ate very little, and they were given really awful things, and they ended up eating worms. We heard, and we heard they clearly are malnourished. Their GI tracts will come back to normal, but will take a long time, and again, a very careful reintroduction of normal nutrition.
And what do they need right now? You said something about they have to be slowly introduced into food, and you talked about the vitamin D deficiency, regaining their muscle. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, but, they may have things like scurvy and beriberi from vitamin deficiencies. They have to be given nutrients right away, and they severe dehydration for sure they have. I think that protein, they're going to have problems with protein deficiencies. All of the major organs of the body are affected when you're living in these conditions. Your heart, your lungs, certainly your kidney and your liver. Your kidneys can be very damaged with inappropriate and inadequate nutrition over time. All of this can be treated, and it is being treated. Well, those in Sheba, I have to tell you, I've been dealing with Sheba for 4 years now, even before October 7th. This place is unequaled in terms of a trauma center. It's as good as anywhere in the world. Israel's very proud of Sheba Medical Center.
All right, we're going to take another break then and be right back with Dr. Marc Siegel. The book is called The Miracles Among Us: How God's Grace Plays a Role in Healing. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Healthy Living. We are continuing our discussion with Dr. Marc Siegel. The book is called The Miracles Among Us: How God's Grace Plays a Role in Healing. And Dr. Siegel, of course, a lot of people say just life itself is a miracle and the blessing of life. So many families, so many couples are struggling with infertility. And we noticed that President Trump mentioned a new measure to make IVF more affordable. Your thoughts on that, sir?
I like the way you framed that. I think that life itself is a miracle. And I also am a big believer in IVF because I think that if God gives us the tools to make life, then those tools are in keeping with our religion. I'm a very religious person, and that's why I'm on the show with you. And I don't think that there's any problem with fertility measures, with IVF. But the biggest problem with it is affordability. A lot of insurances don't cover it, and it can cost many thousands of dollars, and people go bankrupt trying to pay for it, and then they got to go through multiple cycles, and they don't quite succeed, and they don't know if they're on the verge of success. It's a tantalizing situation that sometimes works and sometimes doesn't. I am applauding the president for doing this. He's using muscle to get drug companies in line to where things are more affordable. He's doing that across the board. He's a master at the public-private partnership. He's using the stick in this case rather than the carrot. And I think he's right, and I think it will work, and I think it'll bring it down to a level where more people are going to be able to afford this. Now, one of the reasons this happens is that people wait till very late in life to try to have a kid. That's not healthy for a lot of reasons. So I'm encouraging all of our viewers today to think about, are you waiting too long? Because as you get older, fertility wanes. And we're at a time where fertility is kind of a problem already, not just because of aging, but because of environmental factors that may influence fertility, toxins. So I would encourage people to think of it earlier. But on the other hand, you want to add a child to a relationship that's really firm. So one of the things that happened in previous generations was people had kids too soon in relationships that weren't fully formed, and then they end up splintering. I'm not for that either. So I'm for building a big family unit, adding children on top of it. They're kind of a weight, you know. And then keeping that unit together. I'm not for divorce. I'm for a strong family with a history. And so if the only way you get there is by waiting so that you end up needing IVF, and I'm generalizing here because some people need IVF, period. They can't have a child the normal, natural way, and they need IVF. Again, IVF is natural. I am completely on board with it, and I'm completely on board with what the president is doing.
All right, we're going to take one final break and be right back with Dr. Marc Siegel. Stay right with us. Welcome back to Healthy Living. We're talking with Dr. Marc Siegel. And Dr. Siegel, this time of year, a lot of people are thinking about vaccines. What kind of a flu season are we expecting? And do you recommend people get their flu vaccines? If so, when?
There's two purposes to have vaccines. One is to protect yourself. The other is to protect other people. And even vaccines that don't prevent spread may prevent or decrease your risk of hospitalization. And we're going into respiratory virus season, we're seeing a lot of pneumonia. So I would say, and Diane Keaton's death brought this up, that if you're over the age of 50, you should be considering Prevnar, especially if you have underlying medical conditions. That's a really good vaccine for pneumonia. Flu vaccine, there was a pretty big flu season in Australia and South America this year. We look at that and say that those strains may spread here. So I'm for the flu shot. Flu shot decreases your risk of a severe outcome, especially important in high-risk groups like those over 65 or with underlying conditions. The RSV shot is now around. That's the #1 cause of hospitalization for very young children and infants. So that's something that the elderly should be taking, and pregnant women. Uh, because it's decreasing the rate of those hospitalizations. The COVID vaccines are receiving a lot of controversy. The president just took a COVID booster. I'm definitely for COVID shots for high-risk groups and those over the age of 65 as well. What COVID shot you take is a question. I still think that Novavax is underutilized. I'm okay with the safety profile on the COVID vaccines across the board. All of those vaccines are things you should be up to date with, especially if you're elderly, especially if you're in high-risk groups. High-risk groups meaning you have another medical condition.
Do you recommend COVID vaccine for people under 65 who do not have underlying causes?
I think it's a choice. It's always an individual. Well, are you traveling? Where are you going? What was your reaction to COVID last time? What was your reaction to the COVID vaccine last time? How many of you had? These are individual decisions when it's somebody that's a perfectly healthy individual. They may say, I had a very bad case of COVID, but then I got the vaccine and I had a less bad case of it, or I didn't get it at all, or I got it mild. Then I'd say take it. So I like to be involved in that conversation.
Dr. Siegel, unfortunately, we're about out of time. Tell our viewers where they can find out more about you.
Well, you can find me at drsiegel.com, DOCTORSIEGEL.com. My Twitter handle at DRMARCSIEGEL. That's at DRMARCSIEGEL. And you can find me with this book, The Miracles Among Us, which is selling from Fox Books, Fox News Books. You can get it on Amazon. You'll learn a lot about me with this book because you'll see that I believe in a positive spirit of coming together, of kindness and belief in God to guide your path forward.
How encouraging and uplifting. Thank you, Dr. Siegel, so much for being with us today. We appreciate your time.
Great to be with you today. Great show. Thank you.
And thanks to you for tuning into this edition of Healthy Living. I'm Lori Johnson, and we'll see you again next week.